My thing is this. These record labels are inclined to keep us as dumb as possible. They know that if we get to communicating and putting our heads together and comparing notes, we're going to figure out it real fast. They also know that if we get on the same page, it's a chance that we could unionize. They really don't want that.
This is an email from investment banker Jess Staley to Jeffrey Epstein in February 2014. And it says, the group that should be in the streets has been bought off by Jay-Z. The group that should be in the streets has been bought off by Jay-Z.
Pimp C, what happened to him?
He died on Mr. Carter's birthday.
And Beyonce just did the halftime performance, and the license plate on that Cadillac was
Pimp C. Sacrifice.
So Jay-Z still thinks he is untouchable and that he is better than people like DMX and Pimp C.
In fact, it is being reported that Jay-Z feels the reason those legendary rappers never crossed him ever was because of his connections.
And now Pimp C's old interviews are going viral, talking about Jay-Z and exposing how the industry really works.
And the timing lines up with everything happening right. Jay-Z is in the middle of a storm. That GQ interview where he came off completely out of touch backfired on him.
And that came just weeks after his name showed up in those files. Back then, a lot of people dismissed Pimp C as bitterness or paranoia.
But now it's all starting to make sense.
Pimp was trying to warn people about Jay-Z and how people like him keep the fans, and how all of it connects to what's been exposed lately. Including an email in those files where a billionaire flat out said Jay-Z is being used to keep black people from rebelling.
But this also raises the question, what actually happened to Pimp C?
Why does no one want to talk about the suspicious circumstances surrounding his death?
And was he really scared of Jay?
Pimp C died in 2007. And why haven't we got a Pimp C documentary? Because there was a lot of strange details surrounding Pimp C's death.
So let's start
with what came out about Jay-Z and those DOJ files.
The mainstream media only reported on an anonymous FBI tip from a woman who claimed she was taken against her will and woke up in a room with Jay-Z and Harvey Weinstein.
And of course, fans were quick to dismiss this story as fabrication because this woman never filed any charges or directly accused Jay-Z of anything.
But what if
this story was just a distraction?
Because there's another document in those files that mentions Jay-Z, but for some reason, not a single news outlet reported on it. So there's an email from February 3rd, 2014. And in this email, former JP Morgan banker and Barclays CEO Jess Staley is responding to something about protests in Brazil.
At the time, there were massive uprisings happening there, and people were in the streets protesting over the government spending billions on the World Cup, while regular people couldn't afford basics. So Jess Staley looks at what's happening in Brazil,
then looks at what's happening in the US, and he writes to Jeffrey to tell him he and other billionaires don't have to worry about Americans protesting like Brazilians. Why? Because, in his words, the ones who are supposed to be in the streets have been bought off by Jay-Z. Here's the email, word for word. You want to know why we are not Sao Paulo?
Watch the TV ads on the Super Bowl. It's all about hip blacks and hip cars with white women.
The group that should be in the streets has been bought off by Jay-Z.
Let's sit with that for a second. A Wall Street banker is telling Jeffrey that the reason black Americans aren't revolting is that Jay-Z pacified them. The Super Bowl commercials show black men with luxury cars and white women. And that image, the fantasy of success, crossing over, of making it, is enough to keep people from challenging the system. Every kid watching that Super Bowl ad sees Jay-Z and thinks maybe that could be, instead of thinking about why the system produces so few Jay-Z's while so many people are struggling to get by. Now, here's what's important to understand about this email.
It wasn't some leaked document from a hacker. It was released by the Department of Justice. It's public record, and it shows in plain language how the elite think about hip-hop and black culture, not as art or expression, but as a tool. And this is exactly what Pimp C was saying about the industry years before this email was ever written. Let's go back to 2006. Pimpy is out of prison. He's promoting his album Pimpilation, and he goes on BET's Rhapsody.
And what he says on there is something that almost nobody in the industry was saying out loud.
He invites rappers to unionize in order to keep from being used by record companies. But of course, this interview has been scrubbed from the internet, and now it's only mentioned in obscure articles and fan forums. There's one article published on the Afro Lounge that provides some quotes from Pimp's interview on Rhapsody,
And here's what he said. Labels don't want artists to talk to each other. If we get to talking too much, we just might get a union together. If we unionize, they can't win anymore. Don't you fools realize that we can get a whole bunch of money together? And that same article quotes Pimp from an interview he did with Donna Garza, where Pimp said that the divide and conquer strategy is being used in hip-hop. He explained how record label executives intentionally create beefs to stop the artists from working together for the common good. And Pimp didn't just mention this once or twice. He used to talk about it all the time, even in random run-ins with paparazzi.
My thing is this. These record labels are inclined to keep us as dumb as possible. They know that if we get to communicating and putting our heads together and comparing notes, we're gonna figure out some shit fast. They also know that if we get on the same page, it's a chance that we could unionize. They really don't want that. They don't want rappers united. They don't want artists united. They want division, because divided they can conquer.
Now think about what that means. A union for rappers and artists coming together to demand fair contracts, ownership of their masters, and control over their publishing. The same kind of protections that actors have, that athletes have. Pimp C was saying hip-hop artists deserve that too. And he wasn't just talking, he was living it. He co-owned Trill Entertainment with Bun B. He owned UGK Records. He handled most of the production for UGK himself because, in his work, he couldn't find anybody who would give him what he needed. So he had to make it himself. Pimp understood that independence wasn't just about creative freedom. It was about not being owned. But the industry and the people who signed Jay-Z's checks don't want artists to unionize. And that's not a conspiracy. That's just when artists are divided, competing against each other, signing whatever deal gets put in front of them, the labels hold all. So when artists start talking about unionizing, that's a threat to the whole system. Pimp C saw that clearly. Now this is where the actual beef between Pimp and Jay-Z gets worse. Because a lot of people think Pimp just didn't like the beat for Big Pimpin' and that was it. But it actually went way deeper than that. The truth is, Pimp C almost didn't do that song at all. And the reason was about loyalty, specifically loyalty to... You see, Tupac and Jay-Z had issues back in the day. Pac wasn't a fan of Jay. He saw Jay as being aligned with Big Puff. And in Pac's mind, those were the people who betrayed him. So if you were cool with Biggie, Pac wasn't cool with you. And Jay was definitely cool with Biggie. Now Pimp C, he held Tupac in high regard. And Too Short explained that Pimp C's only logic for not wanting to be on Big Pimpin' with Jay-Z...
He didn't even know him. And he's like, I'll ride with Pac till the end. So anybody who ever said this on Tupac, ever, Pimp C didn't like you. He just never would fool with you, ever. So he put Jay-Z in the category of, I don't think Tupac liked him. Tupac wouldn't, as Biggie homie or whatever, I ain't fooling with him.
Bun B also told the story about being in Atlanta with Pimp.
When the call came through from Jay-Z, and all Pimp could think about was what would Tupac do.
Pimp used to have this big paper on the wall. And so literally when the call came and he looked up at the wall and he just stared at the picture. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm thinking, what would Tupac do right now? And Tupac wouldn't want me to fuck with him. Tupac was a man of very high personal standards and character, right? And did not have a lot of friends. And Pimp C felt the same way. He felt he was a man of those same standards and character. And so he didn't want to do anything that he felt Tupac would do. And working with Jay-Z in his mind was something Tupac wouldn't do.
And then there's another story from a record executive named Greg Taylor. He was on the phone with Pimp telling him about a deal with Rockefeller. And when Pimp heard Jay-Z was involved in the deal, he told them to take that check and give it to Tupac's mama.
So I called him instantly because I knew y'all niggas at the house.
Right.
And I was like, yo, I'm excited. I got $1 million. This is it. Rockefeller is the shit. Hey, there's this. I called Pimp and these niggas fighting. So I calmed them down. And then once Pimp locked in, he was like, wait a minute, Rockefeller. Ain't that where Jay-Z at? I was like, yeah. And I didn't get the connection. He was like, tell him to take that check over to Tupac mama and give it to him for stealing all Tupac's shit. And I'm like, what?
I put him on that Pac life, boy. he went, once I let him hear that Tupac, he went on his mission forward.
And then on top of the Tupac loyalty, Pimp also had a problem with how before Big Pimpin', Jay had wanted Pimp on a different track called, but he expected Pimp to fly to New York to record. However, Pimp felt that if Jay really wanted him to hop on the track, he should come to Houston.
And that's what made Pimp different from most other rappers. He didn't chase or suck up to anybody, especially not Jay-Z.
So when Big Pimpin' Pimpin' came up, Pimp was already skeptical. Then he heard the beat and he said it sounded like a pop record, and he was scared fans wouldn't take UGK seriously if they went in that direction.
Bundy had to do a lot of convincing, and he told Pimp the song was going to be a big deal. So eventually Pimp agreed, but he set conditions. He said he was only giving 8 bars, not 16. And that's exactly what he did. Now, when it came time to shoot the video, Pimp refused to go to Trinidad with Jay and Dame. So eventually they had to fly a whole production crew to Miami just to get his scenes.
And even then, Pimp did it his way. He showed up in a new Mercedes, wore a mink coat, and made sure he had the baddest video vixen. He wasn't there to follow orders. He was there to let everybody know who he was. So when people ask why Pimp C never crossed Jay-Z, the answer is simple. He didn't respect him. Not because of some petty rap beef. Not because he was scared. It was because Jay represented everything that
Pimp was actively fighting against. Now, let's get into the part that never sat right with a lot of people. December 4, 2007, Jay-Z's 38th birthday. Pimp C is found dead in his room at the Mandarin Hotel in West Hollywood. He was 33 years old, and right away, something was off.
The initial reports from the LA County Coroner's Office said there were no signs of foul play. Captain Ed Winter told TMZ that Pimp was found fully clothed, lying on top of his bed. And here's the important part. No substances or paraphernalia were found in the room. They also said there was no sign of any accident that could have caused his death, and that it appeared to be possibly natural. But then the story changed. Weeks later, the coroner came back with a different explanation. They said Pimp died from the effects of lean combined with sleep. However, they said the levels of medication in his system were elevated, but not enough to be considered an OD. So technically, it wasn't an OD. Instead, the cough syrup supposedly suppressed his breathing just enough that his sleep apnea did the rest. That's the something always felt sketchy about this.
And here's another thing
that stands out.
Pimp C had just signed a new solo deal with Jive Records. He had a lucrative publishing deal
lined. He was about to launch a satellite radio show. He also had a national cologne endorsement, and he had also recently celebrated his 4th wedding anniversary with his wife, Shannara. In other words, he had everything to live for. His career was about to reach new heights. He had just come home from prison a couple of years earlier. He finally had his life and his business together. He was in love, and he just happened to die in a hotel room under mysterious circumstances. And here's where this gets really spooky. DJ Paul from 36 Mafia spoke to the manager who saw Pimp's body. And according to DJ, the manager said there was blood splattered all over the bed and walls like the room had been shut up. And what's even weirder is that the manager said Pimp's body was on the floor in a kneeling position, like he was praying. And even Pimp C's own mother never bought the official story. In fact, according to investigative journalist Julia Beverly, who wrote Pimp's biography Sweet Jones, Pimp C's Trill Life Story, Pimp's mom, Weslyn Monroe, believed her son was poisoned by someone who...
Well, his mom believes he was murdered, and she basically breaks down the reasons why she believes that. I couldn't really... There's some circumstantial evidence that might make you think that. But as far as like physical evidence, I had some other people review the autopsy report and things like that, and they didn't really come to a solid conclusion as far as, you know, any foul play or things like that. But a lot of people have heard that he died of a codeine overdose, which is not true at all. That was actually, you know, the day he passed or the day that the results of the tests and whatnot were not announced, the coroner said, you know, he did not overdose. And then you had all these newspapers that said that he did overdose. So that was just irresponsible media that came up with that story. But the official story was that he had sleep apnea, which is a condition which can make it hard for you to basically stop breathing in your sleep. And the story was that he took some codeine which prevented his body from waking up the way that it normally would. So it feasibly could have happened that way. But there are some alternate theories which I kind of explore in the book. His mom thinks he was poisoned, and there was someone with him when he passed who was a very shady, strange character. So there is actually a person of interest, according to his mother, that she believed had something to do with his death. So I wasn't able to really definitively come to a conclusion, but I've laid out all the...
And to this day, many fans are still convinced Pimpy was silenced
because he knew too much about the industry and was starting to encourage artists to turn against the record labels. Same white-owned record labels that helped Jay-Z become a billionaire while throwing under the bus his own people. And you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to see that something about this doesn't add up. C was a man who refused to bow. He talked about unionization when nobody else would. He called out industry figures by name. And he died at 33, right when everything was about to take off. Now, nearly 20 years later, we're seeing some of the people he warned about getting exposed. And it makes you wonder, if Pimp C was alive today, what would he be telling us? Was he warning us about Jay-Z and the people Jay works for?
And what do you think about his death? A tragic accident or something deeper? Leave your comments below and stay tuned for the next video to Word.